The sound of shattering glass echoed through the small ranch house outside Laramie, Wyoming, and Katherine O'Brien knew she had mere seconds to decide whether tonight would be the night she finally ran. Her brother Vincent's heavy footsteps thundered across the wooden floorboards above her head, each stomp punctuated by slurred curses that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Katherine pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the root cellar where she'd hidden, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she clutched the small canvas bag she'd packed 3 weeks ago and kept concealed behind the potato sacks. Inside were a change of clothes, the last photograph of her mother, and the $17 she'd managed to save from selling eggs in town without Vincent knowing. It was October 1882, and Katherine had just turned 21. She'd been planning her escape for months, ever since the night Vincent had grabbed her by the throat and told her she'd never leave, that she belonged to him to control until he decided to marry her off to whichever rancher offered the best price. Their parents had died of fever 2 years prior, leaving Vincent as head of the household, and he'd transformed from an occasionally harsh older brother into a tyrant who drank away their father's savings and blamed Katherine for every misfortune that befell them. The cellar door rattled violently. "Katherine, I know you're down there, you ungrateful wretch," her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the narrow ventilation slats near the ceiling, she could see the first hints of dawn breaking across the Wyoming plains. If she could just wait him out, if he'd drink himself into a stupor like he sometimes did, she might have a chance to slip away while he slept. But the door crashed open with a splintering crack, and Vincent's silhouette filled the doorway, backlit by the lamp he carried. At 27, he'd grown mean and hollow-eyed, his once handsome face now perpetually twisted with resentment. "There you are, hiding like a coward. Vincent, please." Katherine stood slowly, keeping the bag behind her back. "I just needed some quiet. You were shouting and I got frightened." Frightened? He descended the stairs with deliberate slowness, and Katherine could smell the whiskey on him from 6 feet away. "You should be grateful I keep a roof over your head, but instead you creep around, plotting against me. Don't think I haven't noticed you've been different lately." "I'm not plotting anything. I just want peace." His hand shot out faster than she'd anticipated, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You'll get peace when I say so. Now get upstairs and make breakfast. The Hutchins brothers are coming by this afternoon, and I've promised them you'll be presentable." Katherine's blood ran cold. The Hutchins brothers were notorious in Laramie County, known for running a ranch where hired hands mysteriously disappeared and neighbors' cattle often went missing. The younger one, James, had leered at her in church just last Sunday, making comments about how he'd always wanted a wife who knew her place. "No," the word escaped her lips before she could stop it. Vincent's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What did you say to me?" "I said no." Katherine wrenched her arm free and back toward the far wall, where she knew a small window opened to ground level. "I won't be sold off like livestock. I won't spend my life being passed from one cruel man to another." For a moment, Vincent looked genuinely shocked. Then his face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful little witch. After everything I've done for you," Katherine didn't wait to hear the rest. She grabbed a jar of preserves from the shelf and hurled it at his head. It shattered against the wall beside him, sticky red liquid exploding across his shirt. While he recoiled, she lunged for the window, shoving it open with strength born of desperation. The opening was small, but Katherine was slender from too many meals skipped to avoid Vincent's moods. She squeezed through, ignoring the way the wooden frame scraped her shoulders, and tumbled out onto the dewy grass. Behind her, Vincent roared with fury. Katherine scrambled to her feet and ran. The eastern sky was painted with streaks of pink and gold as she sprinted toward the road that led to town. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but terror kept her moving. She could hear Vincent crashing through the house, shouting threats that chased her across the open land. If he caught her now, she knew there would be no second chance. The road stretched before her, rutted and dusty, winding through scrub grass and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. Katherine had walked this path countless times to sell her eggs, but she'd never noticed how exposed it was, how few places there were to hide. Behind her, she heard the whinny of a horse and knew Vincent had reached the barn. He'd be mounted in minutes. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Katherine forced herself to think. About a mile ahead, the road passed through a narrow canyon where wagons sometimes stopped to rest their teams. If she could reach it before Vincent spotted her, she might find someone to help, might convince a passing traveler to take her to town. She pushed herself harder, her skirts tangling around her legs. The canvas bag thumped against her side. Her lungs felt like they were full of fire and a sharp stitch developed under her ribs, but she didn't slow down. Behind her, the sound of hoofbeats grew steadily louder. "Katherine, stop running, you stupid girl. There's nowhere for you to go." She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw Vincent on their father's old roan mare, riding hard in her direction. The distance between them was closing fast. Katherine sobbed and pushed herself even harder, but she knew it was hopeless. On foot, she couldn't outrun a horse. Just as she felt Vincent's shadow falling over her, just as she heard him lean forward in the saddle to grab her, a rifle shot cracked through the morning air. The bullet hit the ground 3 feet in front of Vincent's horse, sending up a spray of dirt. The mare reared in alarm, and Vincent had to grab the saddle horn to keep from being thrown. "That's close enough, friend." The voice came from up ahead, calm and steady. Katherine stumbled to a halt, her chest heaving, and looked toward the canyon entrance. A man sat astride a paint horse, a Winchester rifle held casually across his saddle. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the dust-covered clothes of a cowboy who'd been on the trail. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his features, but there was something solid and reassuring about the way he sat his horse, completely at ease despite having just fired a warning shot. Vincent got his mount under control and glared at the stranger. "This doesn't concern you, mister." "That's my sister, and I'm taking her home." "Funny thing," the cowboy said, nudging his horse forward a few steps. "From where I'm sitting, it looks like the lady was running away from you. Generally, in my experience, when someone's running that hard from family, they've got good reason." "I told you this is family business. You'd best ride on." The cowboy shifted the rifle slightly, nothing threatening, just a subtle reminder that he was armed. "Can't do that. My mama raised me to be helpful to ladies in distress." He looked past Vincent to Katherine. "Miss, do you want to go back with this man?" Katherine's voice was raw from running, but she managed to speak clearly. "No, I don't. There's your answer." The cowboy's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "The lady doesn't want to accompany you. So I think you should turn that horse around and head back where you came from." Vincent's face had gone red with fury. "Do you have any idea who you're interfering with? This is O'Brien land. My father, your father, isn't here, and even if he was, wouldn't change the facts." The cowboy finally pushed his hat back, and Katherine caught a glimpse of sun-weathered features, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He looked to be in his mid-20s, maybe 4 or 5 years older than her. "I'll give you one chance to do this the easy way. Ride home. Let your sister be. Find some coffee and maybe think about why she felt she had to run from you in the first place." For a long moment, the 3 of them formed a tableau there on the dusty road, the morning sun climbing higher and casting long shadows across the ground. Katherine held her breath, terrified that Vincent would charge forward, that there would be violence, that this stranger who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even finished saying would get hurt trying to defend her. But Vincent had always been a bully, and bullies usually back down when confronted by someone who wouldn't be intimidated. He yanked on his horse's reins, making the poor mare toss her head in protest. "This isn't over, Katherine. You'll come crawling back, and when you do, you'll learn your place." "I don't think so," the cowboy said mildly. "I think your sister has learned all she needs to know about you. Now get." Vincent spat in the dirt, shot Katherine a look full of poison, and wheeled his horse around. They watched him gallop back toward the ranch house, growing smaller with distance until he disappeared over a rise. Katherine's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the middle of the road, her whole body shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. The relief was so intense it felt like drowning. The cowboy dismounted smoothly and walked his paint toward her, moving slowly so as not to spook her. Up close, she could see he had kind eyes despite the hardness that frontier life carved into a man's features. A few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and his dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. His clothes were worn but clean, the gear of a working cowman rather than a drifter. "Are you hurt, miss?" He crouched down a few feet away, giving her space. Katherine shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I'm Dylan Garrett," he said. "I've been trailing a herd up from Colorado, got separated from my outfit yesterday chasing a stray. Saw you running and figured you might need help." He paused. "Was I right to interfere?" "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Katherine cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "Nothing good, I'd wager." Dylan glanced back down the road where Vincent had disappeared. "That really your brother?" "Unfortunately." Katherine hugged her canvas bag to her chest. "Our parents died 2 years ago. Vincent inherited everything. He's been drinking more and more, getting meaner. This morning he told me he was planning to marry me off to a man I don't want anything to do with." "I couldn't take it anymore." Dylan nodded slowly, processing this. "Where were you headed? Town, I suppose. Laramie, I have a little money. I thought maybe I could find work, rent a room somewhere." Even as she said it, Katherine knew how naive it sounded. Respectable work for single women was scarce, and $17 wouldn't last long. "You have friends there. Family," she shook her head. "Your brother know that." Katherine's brief surge of hope deflated. Of course Vincent knew. He'd made sure she had no one to turn to, had isolated her systematically since their parents died. "He'll look for me there first, won't he?" "I expect so." Dylan stood and offered her his hand. His grip was warm and calloused when she took it, and he pulled her up easily. "But that doesn't mean you're out of options, Miss O'Brien." "Katherine," she said automatically. "Just Katherine. Katherine." He said her name like he was testing how it felt. "I think you need to get further away than Laramie, at least for a while. Give your brother time to cool down, maybe give yourself time to figure out what you really want to do. I can't ask you to take me anywhere. You've done more than enough already." Dylan smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and less world-weary. "You didn't ask." "I'm offering. My outfit's headed up to Montana, but there's a town about 50 miles northwest of here, Shoshone City. It's small but decent. I know some people there, folks who might be willing to help a lady who's had some hard luck. Why would you do that?" Katherine studied his face, searching for any hint of the ulterior motives she'd learned to watch for in men. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything." "Could be," Dylan agreed, "but I don't think you are. I've seen enough of the world to recognize truth when I hear it, and besides," he looked uncomfortable for the first time, I had a sister once. She got married young to get away from our father, who had a temper. Her husband turned out to be worse. By the time I was old enough to help her, it was too late. She died having a baby she was too frightened to tell anyone she didn't want. His jaw tightened. So when I see a woman running from a man who's supposed to protect her, I reckon it's the least I can do to step in. Sorrow squeezed Catherine's heart. I'm so sorry. Ancient history now, she's been gone 8 years. Dylan shook his head as if clearing away painful memories. Point is, I can't help her anymore, but I can help you, if you want the help. Katherine looked back down the road toward her brother's ranch, then up at the sky that stretched vast and impossibly blue above them. She thought about the life Vincent had planned for her, about being married off to James Hutchins or someone equally cruel, about slowly dying inside like a plant deprived of sunlight. Then she looked at Dylan Garrett with his honest eyes and his sad story about a sister he couldn't save. "All right," she said. "I'll accept your help, thank you." The relief on Dylan's face told her she'd made the right choice. "Can you ride?" "Well enough." "Good, we'll double up until we can get you a horse of your own. I passed a ranch about 15 miles back where a family named Prescott lives. Good people. We can stop there, get you properly mounted, and head for Shoshone City." He untied his canteen from his saddle and handed it to her. "Drink. You look like you could use it." The water was warm and tasted of leather, but it was the best thing Katherine had drunk in months. She drained half the canteen before handing it back. "I have $17. I can pay for a horse." "Let's not worry about that right now. The Prescotts owe me a favor from a few years back. Help them drive off some rustlers. I expect they'll be willing to work something out." Dylan mounted his paint, then reached down. "Give me your hand." Katherine let him pull her up behind the saddle. It had been years since she'd ridden double, not since she was a girl and her father would take her into town for penny candy. She hesitated for a moment, then wrapped her arms around Dylan's waist. His body was solid and warm, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Hold on tight," he said, and urged the paint into an easy lope. They rode in silence for a while, the Wyoming landscape rolling past them in shades of gold and brown. The morning air was crisp with the promise of winter, carrying the scent of sage and dry grass. Katherine found herself relaxing incrementally, the tension that had been her constant companion for 2 years slowly unknotting from her shoulders. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something that might have been hope. "Can I ask you something?" Dylan's voice carried back to her. "Of course." "If you could do anything with your life, what would it be?" The question surprised her. No one had asked her that in years, maybe ever. Katherine thought about it as the paint's hooves drummed against the hard, packed earth. "I'm good with numbers," she said finally. "My father taught me bookkeeping before he died. He said I had a head for business. I used to help him with the ranch accounts, kept everything organized. Vincent let it all go to chaos after, wouldn't let me help, but I remember how satisfying it was to make everything balance, to see patterns in the numbers." She paused, feeling foolish. "I know that's not very exciting." "Sounds useful," Dylan said. "World needs people who can keep track of things, make sense of the messy parts. Nothing wrong with that." "What about you?" Katherine asked. "What do you want?" Dylan was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I want a piece of land I can call my own. Not a lot, just enough to run some cattle, maybe grow some hay. I've been working other men's ranches since I was 14, saving every penny I could. Few more years, I might have enough to buy property, build something that'll last." He laughed self-consciously. "Probably sounds boring to someone your age." "It sounds wonderful," Katherine said, and meant it. "It sounds like freedom." They reached the Prescott Ranch just after midday. It was a modest operation, a tidy house with a barn and several outbuildings nestled in a valley where a creek ran year-round. A woman hanging laundry looked up as they approached, then called toward the house. A man emerged, middle-aged and weathered, squinting against the sun. Dylan dismounted and helped Katherine down before walking forward with his hand extended. "Afternoon, Mr. Prescott. Don't know if you remember me. Dylan Garrett. I helped you and your boys with that rustler problem 3 summers back." Recognition dawned on Prescott's face. "Garrett. Of course I remember. You and those 2 friends of yours ran those thieves clear into the next county." He shook Dylan's hand enthusiastically, then looked at Katherine with open curiosity. "Who's this?" "This is Miss Katherine O'Brien. She's had some trouble with family and needs to get to Shoshone City. I was hoping we might trade for a horse, something gentle but with some stamina." Mrs. Prescott had walked over, a plump woman with kind eyes and flour dusting her apron. She took one look at Katherine's disheveled state and bruised arm and clucked her tongue sympathetically. "You poor dear. Come inside and let me get you something to eat. You look half-starved." "I don't want to impose," Katherine started, but Mrs. Prescott was already ushering her toward the house. "Nonsense. Any friend of Mr. Garrett's is welcome here. Besides, I won't have it said that I let a young woman pass by without offering hospitality. Come, come." Inside, the house was warm and smelled of baking bread. Mrs. Prescott sat Katherine down at a well-scrubbed table and immediately began assembling a meal. Thick slices of bread with butter, cold roasted chicken, fresh cheese, and apples from their own trees. Katherine tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but she was ravenous. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a full meal. While she ate, Dylan and Mr. Prescott discussed horses. Through the window, Katherine could see them walking toward the barn, their conversation animated but friendly. Mrs. Prescott busied herself at the stove, giving Katherine space to eat, but eventually she sat down across from her with 2 cups of coffee. "I don't mean to pry," she said gently, "but are you running from something bad?" Katherine swallowed a bite of bread and nodded. "My brother. He's been cruel since our parents died. This morning it got worse and I knew I had to leave." "Does he know where you're going?" "Mr. Garrett is taking me to Shoshone City. I don't think Vincent knows anyone there." Mrs. Prescott nodded thoughtfully. "That's good. Distance helps. My sister was in a similar situation once, with a husband who was free with his fists. She came to stay with us for a while, and eventually he got tired of looking and moved on to make someone else miserable." She reached over and patted Katherine's hand. "You're brave for leaving. Lots of women stay because they think they don't have a choice. I didn't feel brave. I felt terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared, dear. It means you're scared and you do what needs doing anyway." Mrs. Prescott smiled. "You're going to be fine. Any woman who can run from a bad situation and accept help from a stranger has the strength to build a new life." The words settled over Katherine like a blessing. She blinked back tears and managed a shaky smile. "Thank you." By the time Dylan and Mr. Prescott returned, Katherine felt almost human again. They'd picked out a bay mare, 7 years old with a sweet disposition and good trail manners. Mr. Prescott insisted Katherine take the horse as a gift, but Dylan negotiated until they agreed he'd send payment once he reached Montana. They also provided a saddle, saddlebags, and enough provisions to reach Shoshone City comfortably. "Thank you," Katherine said to the Prescotts as she prepared to mount the bay. "I can't tell you how much your kindness means." "You take care of yourself," Mrs. Prescott said, pressing a small cloth bundle into her hands. "There's an extra dress in there and some other necessities. You'll need to look presentable when you arrive in town." Katherine hugged her impulsively, and Mrs. Prescott hugged back fiercely. "You write if you need anything," she whispered. "And don't you ever let anyone make you feel small." They left the Prescott Ranch in the early afternoon, riding northwest at an easy pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses. The terrain began to change as they traveled, becoming more rugged, with red rock formations rising from the earth like ancient sentinels. Dylan proved to be easy company, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about his years on the trail, without prying into Katherine's past beyond what she'd already shared. As the sun started to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Dylan led them to a sheltered spot where a cluster of cottonwoods grew near a spring. "We'll camp here tonight," he said. "Shoshone City is still about 40 miles off. We can reach it tomorrow afternoon if we start early." Katherine dismounted, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle, and helped Dylan tend the horses. She'd grown up on a ranch and knew her way around animals, which seemed to please him. They worked together in companionable silence, unsaddling the horses and rubbing them down before hobbling them where they could graze. Dylan built a small fire and set about making coffee while Katherine unpacked the food Mrs. Prescott had sent: more bread, dried beef, and a jar of peach preserves that made her mouth water. They ate sitting on their saddles, the firelight dancing between them, the vast Wyoming night pressing in around their small circle of warmth. "Tell me about Shoshone City," Katherine said. "What's it like?" Dylan poured more coffee, considering his answer. "It's small, maybe 300 people. Started as a mining town back in the 60s, but the silver played out pretty quick. Now it's mostly ranching and farming, folks who stayed because they liked the area. There's a main street with the usual businesses, a church, a school. The sheriff's decent, a man named Tom Whitmore. He keeps the peace without being heavy-handed. And you know people there, a few. There's a couple named Harry and Judith Chen who run the general store. They came out from San Francisco 10 years back. Judith's a shrewd businesswoman, keeps the books for half the operations in the county. I think she might be willing to give you work if you're good with numbers like you said." Katherine felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. "Really?" "She'd hire me without knowing me. She might if I vouch for you, and if you can prove you know your way around a ledger." Dylan smiled. "I've known them since I was 16. Harry saved my life once when I got snakebit. I was working a ranch nearby, got careless and didn't watch where I stepped. He knew exactly what to do, got the poison out before it could spread too far. I owe them." "Everyone seems to owe you favors," Katherine observed. Dylan shrugged. "I try to help when I can. It's how you survive out here, by building a network of people who'll look out for each other." He met her eyes across the fire. "I want you to know, Katherine, I'm not doing this because I expect anything from you. I just want to see you safe and settled. After that, what you do with your life is your own business." "I know," she said softly. "I can tell you're a good man, Dylan Garrett." "There aren't many of those. There are more than you think. You've just had bad luck with the ones in your life so far." They fell silent, listening to the fire crackle and the horses snuffling in the darkness. Katherine found herself studying Dylan's face in the flickering light, noting the strong lines of his profile, the way his hands looked both gentle and capable as he cradled his coffee cup. He was handsome in a weathered, unpretentious way, but more than that, he was kind. After 2 years of Vincent's cruelty, Dylan's kindness felt like water in a desert. "You should get some sleep," Dylan said eventually. "I'll take first watch." "Watch for what? Is there danger?" "Probably not, but it's good practice when you're camping in open country. Could be wolves, could be people with bad intentions. Better to be cautious." He gestured to where he'd laid out bedrolls on the far side of the fire. "You take that one. I'll wake you in a few hours if you want to take a turn, or I can just let you sleep through." "Wake me," Katherine said. "I want to do my share." Dylan nodded approvingly. "Fair enough." Katherine settled into the bedroll, which still carried the scent of wool and sage. The ground was harder than any bed she'd ever slept in, and the sounds of the night were strange and wild. But when she closed her eyes, she felt safer than she had in years. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Dylan silhouetted against the stars, watching over the camp with quiet vigilance. She woke to Dylan's gentle hand on her shoulder. "Your turn if you want it. Everything's quiet." Katherine sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The fire had burned down to embers, and the moon had risen full and bright, washing the landscape in silver light. Dylan showed her where he'd been sitting, handed her his rifle with instructions to fire it if she saw anything concerning, and rolled himself into the other bedroll. "Wake me if you need anything," he mumbled, and within minutes his breathing had evened into sleep. Katherine sat with the rifle across her lap, feeling very small under the enormous sky. But as the night deepened and nothing alarming occurred, she found herself enjoying the solitude, the sense of being suspended between her old life and whatever came next. She thought about the Chen's general store, about the possibility of using her skills, of being valued for her mind rather than treated as property. She thought about Dylan too, about the easy way he moved through the world, helping people without making them feel diminished by the help. She wondered about his dream of owning land, whether he'd achieve it, what kind of home he'd build when he did. And she wondered, with a flutter she didn't quite understand, whether she'd see him again after they reached Shoshone City, or whether he'd disappear back into his own life and become just a memory of the man who'd saved her when she needed it most. When the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn, Katherine added wood to the fire and started coffee. The domestic task was soothing, familiar. Dylan woke to the smell of it, stretching and sitting up with a groan. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough with sleep. "You let me sleep too long. You looked like you needed it." They shared a quick breakfast and broke camp efficiently. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, they were back in the saddle and moving northwest. The day warmed quickly, and they rode through country that grew increasingly beautiful, with red buttes and distant mountains creating dramatic vistas in every direction. They talked more as they traveled, the conversation flowing easily now that they'd spent time together. Dylan told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother who died when he was 12, and the father who'd never recovered from the loss. Katherine shared memories of her own parents, the happy years before they died, the way her father had patiently taught her mathematics and bookkeeping while her mother showed her how to manage a household. "Sounds like they were good people," Dylan said. "The best." "I think if they'd lived, Vincent would have turned out differently. He was their firstborn and my father had high hopes for him. But then they died and Vincent just fell apart, started drinking to cope with the grief and never stopped." "Grief can twist a person," Dylan agreed. "But that doesn't excuse what he did to you." "No," Katherine said firmly. "It doesn't." They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat, then pushed on. As the afternoon wore on, Katherine began to feel nervous butterflies in her stomach. Shoshone City represented a complete unknown, a place where she'd have to rebuild her entire life from nothing. What if the Chens wouldn't hire her? What if Vincent tracked her down? What if she failed at being independent and ended up destitute? Dylan seemed to sense her growing anxiety. "It's going to be all right," he said. "You're stronger than you know, Katherine." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're here. Because you ran when you needed to, because you accepted help from a stranger, because you're not giving up even though you're scared. That takes backbone." His faith in her was a gift she didn't know how to adequately thank him for, so she just nodded and tried to believe he was right. They crested a rise as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, and there below them, nestled in a green valley fed by a river, lay Shoshone City. It was indeed small, but it looked prosperous and well kept, with neat buildings lining a main street and houses spreading out beyond. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Katherine could see people moving about their business, going about normal lives in this pocket of civilization carved from the wilderness. "There it is," Dylan said. "Your fresh start." They rode down the slope and into town as dusk painted the sky purple and gold. People looked up curiously as they passed, taking note of the strangers. Dylan led them straight to a large building on the main street with a sign that read Chen's General Store and Trading Post. He dismounted and helped Katherine down, then tied both horses to the rail. The door opened as they approached, and a petite woman with graying hair and a face that spoke of both Chinese and European heritage stepped out. Her dark eyes were sharp and assessing, but her smile was warm. "Dylan Garrett," she said. "It's been at least 2 years. What brings you to our little corner of the world?" "Hello, Judith. I'm passing through on my way to Montana, but I brought someone who could use a friend." Dylan gestured to Katherine. "This is Katherine O'Brien. She's in need of work and a safe place to land. I thought maybe you could help." Judith's gaze shifted to Katherine, and for a moment Katherine felt completely transparent, as if this woman could see every secret and sorrow she carried. Then Judith nodded slowly. "Come inside, both of you. We'll talk over supper." The store was well stocked and organized, with everything from dry goods to farm equipment arranged with obvious care. They passed through to the living quarters in back, where a man was setting the table for the evening meal. He looked up and broke into a broad smile when he saw Dylan. "Dylan." What a surprise! Harry Chen was tall for a man of Chinese descent, with laugh lines around his eyes and a warm handshake. "You'll stay for dinner, I hope, if you're offering." "Always." Harry pulled out chairs for everyone. "Judith, should I add another plate for the young lady?" "2 plates," Judith corrected. "Katherine, was it? You look like you haven't had a proper meal in far too long." Over dinner, composed of chicken stewed with vegetables and herbs that made Katherine's mouth water, Dylan explained the situation as Katherine had told it to him. The Chens listened without interrupting, their faces growing grave as the story unfolded. When Dylan finished, Judith leaned back in her chair and studied Katherine. "Can you really keep books? Or was that just something your father let you play at?" Katherine met her gaze steadily. "I kept the accounts for our ranch for 2 years before my parents died. I can show you my work if you don't believe me, but my brother has the ledgers now, and I can't go back for them. But I know double-entry bookkeeping. I can calculate interest and percentages in my head, and I can read a balance sheet and tell you whether a business is profitable or dying." Bold claims. But Judith looked intrigued rather than skeptical. She stood and retrieved a ledger from a nearby desk, opening it to a page full of figures. "Tell me what you see here." Katherine leaned forward, scanning the columns. It took her only moments to spot the discrepancy. "Your expenses for September are recorded as $62.35, but when I add the individual entries, they total $68.50. Someone made an error in transcription, probably copying from receipts to the main ledger. The mistake's been carried forward, which means your current cash on hand is off by $6.15. Judith's eyebrows rose. She checked the figures herself, then looked at Harry with surprise. "She's right." "I told you she was good," Dylan said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. "Can you do more than just spot mistakes?" Judith pressed. "Can you manage accounts, follow up on credit, help customers figure their costs?" "Yes. I used to do all of that for my father." Judith exchanged a long look with Harry, some wordless communication passing between them. Then she nodded decisively. "All right. I'll give you a trial period 3 months. You'll work in the store, help with the books, learn our inventory system. Room and board provided plus a small wage. At the end of 3 months, if you're as good as you claim, we'll talk about making it permanent and increasing your pay." Fair. Relief flooded through Katherine so powerfully she felt dizzy. "More than fair. Thank you, Mrs. Chen." "Judith," the older woman corrected. "We don't stand on formality here. You'll have the room above the store. It's small but private with decent furniture and a stove. The previous tenant moved on last month, so it's sitting empty anyway." "I'll pay you back for your kindness," Katherine promised. "Every bit of it." "Just do good work," Judith said. "That's payment enough." They finished dinner, and then Judith took Katherine upstairs to see the room while Harry and Dylan remained at the table, talking quietly. The space was indeed small, just large enough for a bed, a table, a chair, and a small wardrobe, but it had a window that looked out over the street, and it was clean and snug. After 2 years of walking on eggshells in Vincent's house, it felt like a palace. "There's a bathhouse 2 streets over," Judith was saying. "You can get hot water there for a small fee. The privy's out back, shared with 2 other buildings but kept clean. Church is on Sunday if you're inclined, and there's a lending library in the schoolhouse that's open to all." She paused in the doorway. "I won't pry into your past, Katherine, but I want you to know you're safe here. If your brother comes looking, Sheriff Whitmore will handle it. This town looks after its own, and that includes you now." "Thank you," Katherine whispered. "I don't know how to express how much this means." "Thank Dylan when you see him next. He's the one who brought you here." Judith's expression softened. "He's a good man. You could do worse than to have him in your corner." After Judith left, Katherine sank onto the bed, too overwhelmed to fully process everything that had happened. 48 hours ago, she'd been trapped with seemingly no options. Now she had a job, a room, a chance at independence. It felt like a miracle. She heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to find Dylan filling the doorway, hat in his hands. "So," he said, "you're all set." "Thanks to you," Katherine stood. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you, Dylan. You've given me my life back. You don't owe me anything." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I'm glad it worked out. Judith's tough but fair. You'll do well with her. When do you leave for Montana?" "Dawn tomorrow. I need to catch up with my outfit. We've got a schedule to keep." Something heavy settled in Katherine's chest. Of course he was leaving. He had his own life, his own dreams to pursue. She'd known him for barely 2 days, but the thought of him riding away and possibly never seeing him again made her feel unexpectedly hollow. "Will you come back this way?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Dylan looked at her for a long moment, and something flickered in his gray eyes. "I might. The outfit I work for drives cattle through this region pretty regular. Can't say exactly when, but yeah, I expect I'll pass through again." "Good." Katherine took a step toward him. "I'd like to see you again, Dylan, to tell you how I'm doing, to thank you properly when I'm more settled." "I'd like that too." His voice had gone soft. He reached out and gently touched her hand, just a brief connection, but it sent warmth racing up her arm. "You take care of yourself, Katherine O'Brien. Be strong, be smart. Don't let anyone make you small." "I won't," she promised. "And Dylan, thank you for everything, for seeing me when I needed to be seen." He smiled that transformative smile and squeezed her hand once before letting go. "You're going to be just fine. Better than fine. You're going to be amazing." Then he settled his hat on his head, gave her one last look, and walked down the stairs. Katherine moved to the window and watched him emerge onto the street below, untie his paint horse and swing into the saddle. He looked up at her window, and she raised her hand in farewell. He touched his hat brim in response, then rode away into the gathering darkness. Katherine stood at the window long after he disappeared, her hand pressed against the cool glass, feeling like something important had just walked out of her life. But she was also aware that he'd given her a gift beyond price, the chance to discover who she could become when she was free. She was determined not to waste it. The next 3 months passed in a blur of hard work and learning. Judith was exacting but patient, teaching Katherine not just the bookkeeping side of the business but also how to manage inventory, deal with difficult customers, and negotiate with suppliers. Katherine threw herself into the work with fierce dedication, grateful for every task that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. The people of Shoshone City were welcoming in a reserved way, accepting her as one of Judith's employees, and therefore worthy of respect. Katherine made friends slowly, learning names and faces, figuring out the social networks that defined the small community. She attended church on Sundays not because she was particularly devout, but because it helped her become part of the fabric of the town. She also visited the bathhouse regularly, borrowing books from the library and spending her evenings reading by lamplight in her small room. It was a quiet life, almost austere, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. Vincent never came. Katherine lived in fear of it for the first month, jumping at loud noises and scanning every stranger's face for resemblance to her brother. But as weeks turned into months and no one came looking for her, she began to relax, to believe she might actually have escaped for good. Judith reported at the end of the 3-month trial that Katherine's work was exemplary and offered her a permanent position with increased wages. Katherine accepted gratefully, feeling like she'd taken another step toward true independence. But through all the busy days and quiet nights, she thought about Dylan. She wondered where he was, whether he'd reached Montana safely, whether he'd saved enough yet to buy his land. She caught herself watching the road whenever she had a spare moment, hoping to see a rider on a paint horse coming into town. But the weeks passed, and he didn't appear. Spring came to Wyoming, melting the last of the winter snow and painting the hillsides with wildflowers. Katherine had been in Shoshone City for 6 months now, and she'd grown into her new life like a tree putting down roots. She was no longer the frightened girl who'd fled her brother's control. She was becoming someone else, someone stronger. One warm April afternoon, Katherine was working in the store, helping a rancher's wife figure the cost of fabric for new curtains when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up automatically, and her breath caught in her throat. Dylan stood in the doorway, dusty from the trail and looking slightly uncertain, his hat in his hands. His eyes found hers across the store, and his face split into a grin that made her heart skip a beat. "Hello, Katherine," he said. "I told you I'd come back." Katherine excused herself from the rancher's wife and walked toward him, trying not to run. Up close, she could see he looked thinner than she remembered, weathered by months of outdoor work, but his eyes were the same steady gray she'd been dreaming about. "You came back," she said, aware that she was stating the obvious but unable to form more coherent thoughts. "I did. Finished the drive to Montana and worked up there through the winter. Soon as spring came, I talked my boss into taking a route that'd bring us through this area." He glanced around the store. "You look good, Katherine, happy." "I am," and it was true. But looking at him now, Katherine realized she'd been waiting for this moment, that some part of her had been on hold until he returned. "How long are you in town?" "A few days." "The herd's bedded down about 5 miles south. I got time off since we made good progress." He shifted his weight. "I was hoping maybe we could talk, catch up properly." "Yes." Katherine turned to Judith, who'd been watching this exchange with barely concealed interest. "May I go?" Judith said, waving her off. "It's quiet today. I can manage." Katherine grabbed her shawl and followed Dylan outside. They walked without speaking toward the edge of town, where a path led down to the river. The silence wasn't awkward exactly, but it was charged with unspoken things, with 6 months of wondering and waiting. Finally, they reached a spot where willows grew along the riverbank, providing shade and privacy. Dylan turned to face her, and the intensity in his expression made Katherine's pulse race. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he said without preamble. "I told myself I was being foolish, that I barely knew you, that you probably forgot about me the day I left. But I couldn't get you out of my head, Katherine. Your courage, your strength, the way you trusted me when you had no reason to." He took a step closer. "Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you felt it too." Katherine's breath had gone shallow. "I felt it. I feel it. I've been watching for you every day, hoping you'd come back." Dylan closed the remaining distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. "I don't have much to offer you yet. I'm still saving for that land, still living week to week on a cowhand's wages. But I'm steady and I work hard, and I swear to you, Katherine, I would never hurt you. I would spend my life making sure you felt safe and valued and free." "Dylan," she whispered. "I think I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Hell, I think I started falling the moment I saw you running down that road, refusing to give up even though you were terrified. Tell me I have a chance. Tell me that maybe someday you could feel the same." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, happy tears. "You don't have to wait for someday. I already feel the same. I think I have since the night we camped and you told me about your sister, since you looked at me like I was worth protecting." Dylan made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob and kissed her. It was gentle and fierce all at once, a kiss that tasted of promise and hope. Katherine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring 6 months of longing into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dylan pressed his forehead to hers. "Come with me," he said. "When I leave in a few days, come with me. We'll figure it out together." "I can't just leave. I have responsibilities here, and Judith's been so good to me, I know. I'm not saying abandon everything. I'm saying let's find a way to build a life together. Maybe I can find work in this area, stay close to Shoshone City. Or maybe we save up together and buy that land I've been dreaming about. I don't have all the answers, Katherine, but I know I don't want to spend another 6 months wondering if I'll ever see you again." Katherine pulled back enough to look at him properly. "You'd give up the work you've been doing, change your plans for me, in a heartbeat. Plans change, dreams adapt. But finding someone who makes you feel like the world's full of possibility, that's rare. You're rare." Dylan smiled. "Besides, I've been thinking lately that working for other people's outfits isn't getting me where I want to go fast enough. Maybe it's time to take a different approach." Over the next few days, they talked and planned and dreamed together. Dylan introduced Katherine to his trail boss, a gruff but fair man named Simon Davenport, who agreed to release Dylan from his contract early given his years of good service. Katherine spoke with Judith and Harry, explaining the situation with the heartfelt honesty they deserved. Judith listened, then smiled. "I wondered if this might happen when I saw the way you two looked at each other. You have my blessing, Katherine, but I don't want you to throw away everything you've built here." "I don't want to either," Katherine admitted. "This place has given me back myself. I just don't want to lose Dylan either." Judith tapped her fingers on the counter, thinking, what if there was a way to have both? Harry and I have been talking about expanding, maybe opening a satellite office that could serve the ranches on the south end of the county. We'd need someone trustworthy to manage it, someone good with numbers and people. She looked meaningfully at Katherine. "If Dylan's planning to settle in this area, perhaps you two could manage that for us." You'd handle the books and the business side, he'd deal with the ranchers and the physical work. We'd provide the initial stock and take a percentage of profits for the first few years. After that, you could buy us out and own it outright. Katherine's mind raced. You trust us with something like that. I trust you. And if you trust Dylan, that's good enough for me. Judith smiled. Think about it. Talk to him. See if it's something that might work. When Katherine presented the idea to Dylan that evening, his eyes lit up. That could work. That could really work. I've been dealing with ranchers my whole life. I know what they need, what they'll pay for, and you're brilliant with the business side. He grabbed her hands. We'd be partners, real partners, building something together. Is it what you want, though? You talked about owning land, raising cattle. I talked about having something of my own, about not being beholden to other men's whims. This is that, just in a different form. Dylan kissed her knuckles. And it's with you, which makes it better than any dream I had before. They worked out the details over the next week. The location Judith and Harry had in mind was an abandoned trading post about 20 miles south of Shoshone City, positioned perfectly to serve several large ranches that were too far from town to conveniently access the main store. The building was solid but needed repairs, which Dylan could do. It had living quarters attached, which meant they'd have a home as well as a business. The only complication, as Judith delicately pointed out, was propriety. People around here are traditional. An unmarried couple running a business together and living under the same roof, that'll cause talk. The kind of talk that could hurt your enterprise before it gets started. Dylan and Katherine looked at each other. They'd been courting intensely for barely 2 weeks, but Katherine knew in her bones that this was right, that Dylan was right. She'd spent 6 months thinking about him, and now that he was back, every moment in his presence felt like coming home. Then we'll get married, Dylan said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. He turned to Katherine. I know it's fast, and I'm not saying it to corner you or because I expect anything. But I love you, Katherine O'Brien. I want to spend my life with you, building a home and a business and a family. So if you're willing, I'm asking, marry me, be my wife and my partner in everything. Katherine felt tears prickling at her eyes again. A few months ago, the word marriage would have filled her with dread, associated as it was with being sold off to the Hutchins brothers or someone equally terrible. But with Dylan, it meant something completely different. It meant choosing each other, committing to a shared future, building something together as equals. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed 3 weeks later in the small church in Shoshone City, with Judith and Harry standing as witnesses and most of the town in attendance. Katherine wore a dress Judith had helped her sew from cream-colored silk. Simple but elegant, and Dylan wore his best clothes, his hair slicked back and his eyes shining with joy when he saw her walking down the aisle. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dylan kissed her with such tenderness that Katherine forgot to be self-conscious about doing it in front of a church full of people. Afterward, there was a celebration at the store, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. As the party wound down and they prepared to ride to the trading post that was now their home, Sheriff Whitmore pulled Dylan aside. Katherine couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Dylan nod seriously and shake the sheriff's hand. Later, when they were alone on the trail, she asked about it. He wanted to let me know that he sent word to the law in Laramie County about your situation, Dylan explained. Made it clear that you're under the protection of Shoshone City now, and that any attempt by your brother to come after you would be dealt with harshly. Whitmore's got connections. He wanted to make sure Vincent understands you're not alone anymore. Katherine felt a wave of relief so powerful she had to blink back tears. I can't believe how my life has changed. 8 months ago, I was trapped and terrified. Now I'm married to a good man, starting a business, part of a community that protects its own. Dylan reached over from his horse and took her hand. You made a change, Katherine. You were brave enough to run, smart enough to accept help, strong enough to build a new life. I'm just grateful I get to be part of it. The trading post was in rougher shape than Judith had let on, but Dylan assured Katherine he could make it livable quickly. They spent the first week cleaning and repairing, working side by side from dawn until dusk. Dylan fixed the roof where it leaked, reinforced the floorboards, and repaired the corral. Katherine scrubbed years of accumulated grime from the windows and shelves, organized the initial inventory Judith and Harry had sent, and set up a workspace for the bookkeeping. At night, exhausted and dusty, they'd fall into bed in the small room they'd designated as their bedroom, and Dylan would hold her close. Their physical relationship developed gradually, with Dylan always gentle, always checking that she was comfortable, never taking more than she was ready to give. After years of Vincent's aggressive posturing and threats, Dylan's patient tenderness was a revelation. The first time they made love, a week after their wedding, Katherine cried afterward, and Dylan held her and stroked her hair until she could explain that they were tears of relief and joy, that she'd never imagined physical intimacy could be something mutual and caring rather than threatening. I love you, Dylan whispered into her hair, and I will spend every day of my life showing you what love is supposed to look like. The business opened 6 weeks after their wedding, and from the first day it was clear Judith's instincts had been sound. Ranchers who'd been making the long trip to Shoshone City were relieved to have a closer option for supplies and equipment. Dylan's knowledge of ranching and his easy manner made him immediately popular, while Katherine's fair dealing and accurate accounts earned respect from men who were initially skeptical about trusting a woman with business matters. They worked hard, reinvesting profits into expanding their inventory and improving the property. Dylan built on an addition that gave them more storage space and a more comfortable living area. Katherine planted a garden and started raising chickens, enjoying the simple satisfaction of providing for themselves. In the evenings, they'd sit on the porch they'd built together, watching the sun set over the Wyoming hills, and talk about their plans for the future. A year after they'd opened, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a mix of joy and terror. She'd watched her mother go through 3 pregnancies after Katherine was born, resulting in 2 stillbirths and Vincent. The idea of going through that herself was frightening. But Dylan was overjoyed and attentive, taking on more of the physical work so Katherine could rest, riding to town to fetch the doctor at the first sign of anything unusual, reading everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth. His anxiety was almost comical, but it was also deeply touching. "I'm not made of glass," Katherine said with amusement when he tried to stop her from lifting a flour sack that weighed all of 10 pounds. "I know, but you're precious cargo now, 2 precious people." Dylan placed his hand gently on her belly, which was just starting to round. "I'm going to take care of both of you." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1884, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left Katherine exhausted but triumphant. Dylan refused to leave her side despite the doctor's initial protests about men being present for births, and Katherine was grateful for his steady presence, his strong hand holding hers through the worst of the pain. When the baby finally emerged, squalling and red-faced and perfectly healthy, Dylan cut the cord with shaking hands and then sat beside Katherine with tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he kept saying. "You're amazing. He's amazing." They named him Samuel, after Dylan's father, and he was a sturdy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Dylan was besotted, carrying Samuel around whenever he wasn't working, talking to him like he could understand every word, declaring him the smartest, strongest baby in all of Wyoming. Katherine recovered slowly from the birth, grateful for the network of women from Shoshone City who came to help, bringing food and advice and company. Judith was especially constant, staying for days at a time to help with Samuel and the business, teaching Katherine about motherhood with the same patient instruction she'd once used to teach her bookkeeping. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the business continued to thrive. They were able to buy out Judith and Harry's share ahead of schedule, making the trading post wholly their own. Dylan expanded their operations to include buying and selling horses, which proved profitable, while Katherine took on bookkeeping for several neighboring ranches, earning additional income and cementing their place in the community. When Samuel was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, confident in her body's ability to do what was necessary. Their daughter was born in the fall of 1886, an easy birth compared to Samuel's, and they named her Rose after Katherine's mother. She was a tiny thing with wisps of blonde hair and Dylan's smile, and Samuel was immediately protective of her, insisting she sleep in his room so he could watch over her. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, challenges and triumphs, ordinary days that were extraordinary in their contentment. Dylan achieved his dream of owning property when they were able to purchase the trading post and the surrounding acres outright, plus additional land for grazing horses. Katherine found deep satisfaction in running the business side of their operations, her mathematical mind creating order and profit from the chaos of frontier commerce. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Dylan took Katherine up into the hills to a spot he'd discovered where wildflowers grew thick in the spring, and you could see for miles in every direction. They left the children with Judith and Harry, who'd become honorary grandparents, and spent the afternoon lying in the grass, talking and laughing and making love under the vast Wyoming sky. "You ever miss your old life?" Dylan asked afterward, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm. "The ranch where you grew up, anything about how things were before?" Katherine considered this. "I miss my parents. I miss who Vincent used to be before grief and alcohol twisted him. But the life itself? No, that was just surviving. This is living. No regrets about how fast things moved with us. Not a single one." Katherine rolled onto her side to look at him. "You gave me the chance to become who I was supposed to be, and then you stayed beside me while I figured out what that meant. How could I regret that?" Dylan pulled her close. "I love you, Katherine Garrett. Every day I wake up amazed that I get to build a life with you. I love you too, forever and always." 2 years later, in the spring of 1889, Katherine received a letter from a lawyer in Laramie. Vincent had died, his liver destroyed by years of heavy drinking, leaving no will and no heirs except Katherine. The ranch she'd fled was now legally hers if she wanted to claim it. Katherine read the letter twice, feeling strangely empty. She'd built a life so separate from Vincent that he'd become almost unreal, a bad dream that had happened to someone else. Now he was gone, and she felt no grief, just a vague sadness for wasted potential, for the brother he might have been if things had been different. "What do you want to do?" Dylan asked, reading over her shoulder. "Sell it," Katherine said without hesitation. "I don't want anything from that place. Let it go to someone who can make better memories there than I have." Dylan arranged the sale through the lawyer, and the proceeds were substantial enough to allow them to make improvements they'd been dreaming about. A larger house with separate rooms for the children, an expanded barn, better breeding stock for the horses. They used some of the money to help fund a school closer to their trading post, ensuring Samuel and Rose would have access to education without traveling far. As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, the frontier began to change. The railroad brought more people and more commerce, and towns like Shoshone City grew and modernized. But some things remained constant: the big sky, the rolling hills, the rhythm of seasons, and the satisfaction of building something lasting. Katherine and Dylan's trading post became a fixture in the community, a place where ranchers gathered not just for supplies, but for news and companionship. They hosted dances and celebrations, offered credit to families going through hard times, and provided work for drifters who needed a chance to earn an honest wage. Their reputation for fairness and integrity meant people traveled considerable distances to do business with them. Samuel grew into a serious boy who loved numbers like his mother and showed early aptitude for business. Rose was outgoing and fearless, more interested in horses and the outdoors like her father. They were healthy, happy children growing up in a home filled with love and laughter, and Katherine sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was really her life. One evening when she was 35, Katherine stood on the porch of their home, watching Dylan teaching 10-year-old Samuel how to break a young horse while 8-year-old Rose sat on the fence offering loud commentary. The sun was setting, painting everything gold, and Katherine felt such profound contentment it was almost overwhelming. Judith came out to stand beside her. She and Harry had come for dinner, as they did several times a month, the four adults having formed a deep friendship over the years. "You look thoughtful," Judith observed. "Just grateful," Katherine said. "Sometimes I think about what my life might have been if Dylan hadn't come along that road when he did, if he hadn't decided to help a stranger who was running scared." "You would have survived," Judith said with certainty. "You're a survivor, Katherine, but I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone." "So am I." Katherine watched Dylan laugh at something Samuel said, his face creased with joy. "He saved me, and then he loved me, and then he built a life with me. I never knew I could be this happy." "That's what love is supposed to do," Judith said. "Make you bigger than you were alone, make you better." As darkness fell and Dylan brought the children in for dinner, as they all gathered around the table Katherine and Dylan had built together in this house they'd created, Katherine said a silent prayer of thanks. For Dylan, who'd offered protection and given her so much more. For the chance to start over. For the courage she'd found to run toward an unknown future rather than stay in a known nightmare. For the community that had welcomed her. For the children who would never know what it was like to live in fear. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of challenges. There were harsh winters and dry summers, years when money was tight and years when it flowed more freely. Katherine's friendship with Judith deepened into something sisterly, a bond that sustained both women. Harry and Dylan became business partners in several ventures beyond the trading post. Their complementary skills creating opportunities neither could have managed alone. When Samuel turned 16, he asked to take over more of the business side of operations, showing a natural gift for strategy and planning that impressed even Katherine. Rose, meanwhile, developed a reputation as one of the best horse trainers in the county, with ranchers specifically requesting her services despite her young age and gender. Katherine and Dylan watched their children grow with pride and occasional melancholy. That time was passing so quickly. But they also relished having more time for each other as the children needed them less. They took trips to see parts of Wyoming they'd never visited, went to Denver once to see a theater production, and talked about all the things they still wanted to do together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Dylan took Katherine back to the spot where they'd camped that first night, where she'd kept watch while he slept and wondered what her future held. The road looked different now, more traveled, but the land was still vast and wild. 20 years, Dylan said, his arm around Katherine's waist. His hair was graying at the temples and weather had carved deeper lines in his face, but to Katherine he was as handsome as ever. Sometimes it feels like yesterday you were running down this road and I had to decide whether to get involved. I'm glad you did, Katherine said. I'm glad you were the kind of man who couldn't ride past someone in trouble. I'm glad you were the kind of woman who was brave enough to run. Dylan turned her to face him. You made my life better in every possible way, Katherine. You gave me purpose beyond just saving money and buying land. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to build something that'll last beyond our lifetimes. We built it together, Katherine corrected. That's what makes it beautiful. They stood there as the sun set. Two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment, whose lives had intertwined so completely that neither could imagine existing separately anymore. The years had been kind to them, but more than that, they'd been kind to each other, building a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. As full darkness fell, they made their way back to the house where their grown children waited, where a celebration was planned with friends and neighbors coming to mark the occasion. The trading post that had started as a gamble was now a thriving enterprise. The scared girl who'd fled her brother's abuse had become a respected businesswoman and mother. The cowboy who'd offered protection had become a pillar of the community. But more than any of those external achievements, they'd built a love story that would be told in their family for generations. The tale of how Katherine O'Brien ran toward freedom and found Dylan Garrett waiting, of how he offered protection and she offered trust. And together, they created a life richer than either had dreamed possible. In the warmth of their home, surrounded by family and friends, Katherine and Dylan danced together as they had at their wedding 20 years before. The music was provided by neighbors with a fiddle and guitar, and the laughter of their children and friends filled the air. As Dylan spun her across the floor, Katherine caught Judith's eye, and the older woman smiled and raised her glass in a silent toast. Later, when the guests had gone and the children were in their own rooms, Katherine and Dylan lay in bed together, wrapped in each other's arms. Through the window, stars blazed in the Wyoming night, the same stars that had watched over them through every triumph and challenge. "Thank you," Katherine whispered. "For what?" "For giving me forever. For being the man who stopped when he saw someone in trouble. For being patient while I learned what love was supposed to look like. For building this beautiful life with me." Dylan kissed her forehead. "Thank you for trusting me when you had no reason to. For being strong enough to start over. For choosing me day after day, year after year." They fell asleep like that, holding each other, secure in the knowledge that they'd beaten the odds. They'd taken a moment of crisis and transformed it into decades of happiness. They'd proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is run toward an uncertain future, and sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is offer your hand to someone who's running. As the years rolled on into the new century, Katherine and Dylan grew older together with grace. They watched Samuel marry a schoolteacher from Shoshone City and take over the trading post completely, running it with his wife's help and modernizing it for changing times. They watched Rose marry a rancher and start breeding horses on a larger scale, her reputation growing beyond the county. They became grandparents 4 times over, delighting in spoiling grandchildren and then sending them home to their parents. Dylan's hair went completely white, and his movements slowed with age, but he never lost the quiet strength that had first drawn Katherine to him. Katherine's hands became gnarled with arthritis that made bookkeeping harder, but her mind stayed sharp, and she trained her grandchildren in mathematics and business just as her father had trained her. They spent their later years sitting on the porch they'd built together, watching the sun set over land that had become as familiar as their own heartbeats. They told stories to anyone who'd listen about the old days, about the wild frontier that was rapidly becoming civilized, about the challenges they'd overcome together. When Dylan was 68, he caught pneumonia one harsh winter. Katherine nursed him with fierce determination, refusing to let him slip away. And he fought his way back to her, motivated by the promise he'd made on their wedding day to spend his life with her. It took months for him to fully recover, and he never quite regained all his strength, but he survived. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," he told Katherine when he was finally well enough to sit up. "I plan to grow old and gray with you, Mrs. Garrett." "You're already old and gray," Katherine said, but her eyes were wet with tears of relief. "And I plan to keep you that way for a long time yet." They made it to their 40th wedding anniversary, a milestone that brought family from across 3 states to celebrate. The party was held at the original trading post, which Samuel had expanded significantly, but which still retained the bones of the building Katherine and Dylan had rebuilt together. There were toasts and tears, laughter and reminiscence, and a sense that something important was being honored, a love that had endured against odds and blossomed into legacy. Late in the evening, Dylan stood to speak, leaning heavily on Katherine's shoulder but still commanding attention when he had something to say. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his aged body, I was just a cowboy trying to earn enough to buy some land. I thought that was the dream, that owning property was what would make me happy. But then I met a woman running from trouble, and I learned that real wealth isn't measured in acres or dollars. It's measured in mornings waking up next to someone who makes you want to be better. It's measured in children who carry forward your values. It's measured in a life built on trust and respect and genuine partnership. He turned to look at Katherine, his storm-gray eyes still as compelling as they'd been when he was a young man. "Katherine O'Brien, you made a man out of me. You taught me what it means to be a true partner, not just a protector. You built a life with me that exceeded every dream I ever had. And I love you more today than I did when I first saw you running down that road toward your future." Katherine stood and kissed him, not caring that their children and grandchildren and half the county were watching. "And I love you, Dylan Garrett, for having the courage to stop, for seeing someone who needed help and choosing to be the help, for giving me not just protection but partnership, for building a forever with me that was better than any fairy tale." They lived 5 more years together after that, 5 years of slowing bodies but sharp minds, of quiet contentment and the satisfaction of watching their legacy continue through their children and grandchildren. They spent most of their time at the house they'd built, tended by Rose who'd moved back closer to care for them, surrounded by family and friends who loved them. Dylan died first, on a warm spring morning in 1927, with Katherine holding his hand and their children gathered around. His last words were, "Thank you for the life, my love," and then he was gone, peaceful and ready. Katherine grieved deeply but not desperately. She'd had 45 years with him, which was more than many people got. She'd been loved thoroughly and well, had built something lasting, had lived to see their love ripple outward through generations. She visited his grave every day that summer, talking to him about the children and grandchildren, about the world that was changing so rapidly, about how much she missed him but how grateful she was for every moment they'd shared. She lived 2 more years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, long enough to tell them all the stories of their grandfather who'd been a hero in all the ways that mattered. And when she died, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 66. Her children buried her next to Dylan on a hill overlooking the trading post they'd built together. The headstone read, Katherine O'Brien Garrett, 1861–1929, beloved wife, mother, and friend. Next to it, Dylan's stone read, Dylan Garrett, 1858–1927, beloved husband, father, and protector. And between the two stones, their children planted a tree that would grow tall and strong, its roots intertwining beneath the earth just as Katherine and Dylan's lives had intertwined above it. Their story became part of the family lore, passed down through generations as an example of what love could be when it was built on respect and equality. When two people chose each other and kept choosing each other through every challenge and triumph. The trading post remained in the family for 3 more generations, a testament to what two people with vision and determination could build together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the Wyoming wind blew across the hills, people swore they could hear laughter carried on the breeze, the sound of two souls who'd found each other against all odds and built a forever that transcended even death itself. It was the laughter of Katherine O'Brien, who'd fled control and found freedom, and Dylan Garrett, who'd offered protection and received love. Two people who'd proven that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with a single moment of courage and a stranger willing to help.